Hi, this is Stephen Carson coming at you from St. Louis, Missouri, in these United States. Going to bring on Ryan as announced, and someone else I didn't announce, last minute edition. So very exciting. And I have a story to share, but I'll share that once I bring those two on. I just wanted to mention that support is gratefully received. Boy, it's really come in handy lately. So thank you to those who support the show through Subscribestar. You can find the link by going to my YouTube channel. If you're looking at this on Twitter, go to my profile. It's right there. Go to my YouTube channel and look at any video description, like the video description of this one, and you'll see the link to that. That's enough of that. Let's bring on the guests and get rolling. Oops, not that one. How about that one? There we go. All right, Ryan, welcome.
Hello, hello. Thank you for having me.
We are back after a while, and you're somewhere different this time.
Yeah,
that is actually really helpful, right?
Yeah, I'm in an undisclosed location that has some background decoration. I don't even know if it's legible on a monitor, but yeah, it's pretty nice having it.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for some autist to scan the QR code and then like triangulate to your exact coordinates right now, you know. But anyway, because that's what the internet does. And we have Clossington joining us. Thanks for jumping in, sir.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I know it was kind of last minute, but I'd say that I'm a pretty good source on secret societies and fraternalism IRL due to a lot of my IRL involvement in this sort of stuff.
Right. Yeah, I was going to call you a fraternalist. Is that a word?
No, not really.
Not really.
But my credentials go something along the lines of I've been a Freemason for 2 years. I'm a Odd Fellow and an aspiring loyal orangist.
Orange. Okay.
Yeah, it's a very long story, but they're still around. You can still join them. But I'm glad that you guys invited me on last minute.
Yeah. What was I going to say? Well, I wanted to share a story that happened. I was on vacation for the last 3 weeks, back to work this week. But one of the things I got to do, which I usually don't get to do, is went to a homeschooling park day, which my family goes to regularly while I'm at work usually. But I got to go this time. And one of the people I met addressed me as Radlib, and I'm like, oh, I guess you know about the channel, you know? Yeah, I watch your stuff, you know. And then her 1-year-old, I think, was fussing. I was trying to be friendly with the child, and the child was fussing at me or something. And she leaned down and said, "It's okay. He's the one who did the Left Wing Terror series." Which is funny on many levels, but I just thought it was fun to share that story with you, just so you know that there's people out there who watch our stuff. Regular folks. A homeschooling mom in this case. Okay, so here's what we've been doing. And boy, I should have links ready. Let me just share a link to the book that we're doing, because I'm hoping that, especially with this chapter today, which is just so good, I'm hoping that you might be inspired and say, man, I wouldn't mind reading that whole, or having that book on the shelf. I've had this book on the shelf for a long time, by the way, and this has sort of been in part an excuse to get me to finally read it. And I'm so glad I am. Okay, there's the link. The book is called From Mutual Aid to the Welfare State, Fraternal Societies and Social Services from 1890 to 1967. Of course, Clossington will know that that time period is carefully picked. He's not giving you a sweeping history of fraternal societies, though we covered that a little bit in chapter 1, which go back well before 1890, because, of course, the whole point of the book is he's giving us a picture of how they worked, and then how they declined to a great degree, not entirely gone, as Clossington just gave testimony to. They declined to a great degree with the welfare state coming in under the progressives, and then, of course, finally with the death blow, you might say, of the Great Society under the wicked, evil LBJ. If you haven't watched Academic Agent's video, what is it? LBJ, worst president ever, something like that. Highly recommended. In fact, I think it was sort of a two-parter. Okay, so let us get into it. I really love this chapter. It's so interesting. And one of the reasons is, well, it says it right at the beginning. Selectivity was at the heart of fraternalism. This is a challenging sentence for moderns, I think, because it has been drummed into our head that exclusion, selectivity, well, I could use spicier terms, but that these are the most horrible things. And the best thing is that, you embrace all of humanity, and you love everyone, and, you don't distinguish, you don't discriminate, you don't, all that kind of stuff. What this chapter shows us is, well, it teaches us a quite different lesson. I won't spell it out. But so selectivity, David Beto says, was at the heart of fraternalism. There's a couple ways that we're going to talk about selectivity. And one of them is the enforcement of codes. That is, you couldn't just join one of these mutual aid societies or lodges or whatever. There are all kinds of different ways they did this, clubs and so forth. You couldn't just join one of these things and just do whatever you wanted. You could do whatever you wanted, but you wouldn't necessarily get to stay in the society, right? To join one of these was to, I'm trying to trigger the boomers, Ryan, to restrict your personal freedom, right? It was
voluntary imposition of standards on your self-control and ability to restrict your impulses in order to build up your community.
Right.
Basically,
yes.
The opposite of most baby boomer policies.
Right. Exactly. So it was an embrace of non-freedom, but as we'll see, by submitting yourself to this, there were benefits. Right? Benefits to you and benefits to others and to your community. So societies enforced moral behavioral codes. The IOF, Independent Order of Foresters, they said raise them up and make them up if possible. I'm sorry, that phrase totally made sense to me when I highlighted it, and now my brain has gotten scrambled.
It says helping hand.
Yeah,
but, it's a tree pun, I guess. But
right.
But it's also kind of a Mason pun if you are in on the joke. But a lot the way that these like how would you say these are? These ways of vetting people, a lot of them are just to suss out the character of the initiate. Just to make sure that they aren't particularly antisocial and that they'd be a boon to the club.
Right.
Like almost all of these fraternities up to this day do criminal background checks.
Mm-hmm.
They usually require that at least two people, at least two people recommend the initiate to the club. One has to actually belong to the club that they're applying to. A lot of these clubs to this very day will kick you out if you're a convicted felon, unless you have a very good reason why you were convicted, or you can say that you're reformed, but they still probably won't let you in.
Right.
Yeah, a lot of these places have very high baseline moral standards. And if you get too out of hand, or if you get too belligerent, they will kick you out.
Right. So there's something I wanted to call out from what you said, which is the personal endorsement method. And Clessington, would that be pretty ubiquitous that you would
Yeah,
have to be recommended for membership by a member?
Yeah, by two members usually.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And for Masons, at least, even after they recommend you, they send a investigation committee to chat with you, chat with your significant other. I've gone on these investigative committees myself.
Oh, really?
Okay. Yeah, usually you wear a black tux, blacked out like blacked out shades. You really want to spook out the wife.
That's funny.
But
you go full. What was the movie?
Like Men in Black.
Men in Black.
That's exactly what you do. But the point is just go to the person's house, like see if joining the club will impact their family responsibilities. Like if they're a new dad, like a new father, they might not have time, or if there's evidence that they might be abusing their spouse, you don't let them in.
Right. Yeah. So what I was trying to call it is just that that really jumps out to me, those personal endorsements, that part of the process, in addition to the sort of committee vetting and so forth, because part of the challenge you have is what some economists call a knowledge discovery problem, right? God in heaven knows the character of this person, right? But when we're trying to make a judgment about whether to associate with someone, whether to let someone into our mutual aid society, whatever it is, we are limited in our knowledge. What are the various ways we can deal with that? One of them is literally people who maybe have known this person for years, have worked alongside them, have been in a family with them, whatever, they have more extensive knowledge. And so we can lean on that, right? Same thing goes with hiring someone, and it being someone you're already working with that you trust endorses. Hey, I know this person. I worked with them at a couple different jobs. They're really good. They are what they seem. It isn't just a pretty resume. So anyway, that seems good, and also just the personal responsibility, because I don't know what the enforcement mechanisms are, Clessington, but I assume that if you keep recommending people who end up being bad for the society, then that's going to reflect poorly on you at some point, right?
Well, I mean, yes, it does. It's sort of a social faux pas if the guy that you invite ends up getting kicked out right away.
Yeah, that's not good.
But I have never heard of a case where someone recommends a person who eventually gets kicked out getting kicked out themselves.
Right.
I haven't heard of that before.
Of course, I'm thinking of the Mafia true story, which was made into a movie with Johnny Depp, maybe. I forget who played the cop, but he goes undercover and he gets really deep into this mafia, and he's recommended for membership by someone. When it's found out ultimately that he is police, then the guy who recommended him is executed. Anyway, that's extreme.
It might be worth saying that kicking someone out for recommending bad people isn't exactly a comparable punishment. Like, it's probably just going to be the normal social response of, if this person is full of crap, you just don't listen to them after a while. Pretty right. Organic thing that just happens normally.
Okay, so let's hit more of the book here real quick. So let's see. The SBA stipulated that a member be of good moral character, able and competent to earn a livelihood, engaged in an honorable occupation, and a believer in a supreme being. Let's see. There was an invariable rule. And then now we get to the exclusion part. an invariable rule of denying benefits for any sickness or other disability originating from intemperance, vicious, or immoral conduct. And yes, at some point in the chapter, this includes exactly what some of you might be thinking, which is STDs. That's not something they want to support, you know. Oh, no, I'm sorry. There it is. It's right at the bottom of the page. The rules almost always denied benefits for venereal diseases or any ailment caused by immoral conduct. There was, I guess, one of the female orders promised expulsion for any woman who attempted to produce abortion, self-inflicted or by anyone else with her consent. Side note, by the way, for those who would find this interesting, there's a book called Pro-Life Feminism that documents the fact that feminists were strongly anti-abortion for a long time, up until the 1960s, when 3 men convinced them to flop and go pro-choice. So anyway, another thing that's gone down the Orwellian memory hole.
That is American feminism, by the way. You get a sort of brand of feminism that arises in Weimar Germany that did actually not punish abortions, no, not necessarily legalizing it. So it's legalizing abortion is a very European thing that happened sort of after World War I that made its way over to here.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, it might have been the American context that I was learning about there. The exclusion also included religious and racial and exclusion like that. So almost all white fraternal societies scrupulously enforced the color line. It says of 386 organizations in Connecticut in 1891, 97.6% barred blacks. To join the MWA, one had to be at least 7/8 white blood and no strain of Negro blood. So the 7/8 caught my attention. Oh, no strain of Negro blood. Okay, I didn't read that carefully enough when I saw it the first time. Anyway, it reminds me of something I just learned from a fellow named Costin Alamariu, who in his introduction to his dissertation, which he's finally publishing, he mentions that the one drop rule was a northern thing. And in the South, they would recognize someone as white if they were 7/8 white. So you could be 1/8 black, what's called an octoroon. You could be an octoroon. And I almost thought, Ryan, about mentioning to Carl Benjamin that, you know, his children will be okay. But anyway, I didn't know if that'd be in poor taste though. So
a lot of these sort of de facto and de jure segregation rules were actually still in place for most fraternal organizations all the way up until around the 90s, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So it outlasted the initial civil rights onslaught or whatever.
Yeah, right. Religious segregation was on the books in a few churches until the 80s. So fraternal organizations following suit and being told to integrate around that time also makes sense.
Well, a lot of it is informal and unenforceable by law.
Mm-hmm.
The case that comes to mind is a protective moose lawsuit from '91, where they couldn't ban outright African Americans from applying or going into their lodges. They could do that, but in practice, have you ever heard of the concept of blackballing?
Well, you're giving it away. We're about to get to that.
No.
Anyway, hold that thought.
Sure.
Okay, so a little bit more on this exclusion, racial and otherwise, and then I want to address anyone who's listening to this in absolute horror and being like, racial exclusion, this is the Dark Ages. You know, why would you ever? This was terrible. They did this. What is the point of it? I want to try to explain why there might be a point to all these various kinds of exclusion, including racial and religious and ethnic and all the different kinds of exclusion. There is actually a logic to it, but let's just understand the documentation of it first. So this one was just funny. That's why I shared it. and of course with our what 1/8 Indian, Ryan, something like that. I always have to share this
less than that by
less.
far.
Okay, less. So the improved order of red men, he says, their policy was perhaps the most ironic. Their ritual celebrated the culture and tribal structure of, quote, the vanishing race, but no actual Indians were allowed in the improved order of red men. But very interesting. He calls out various exceptions as we go, which I think is quite interesting, because sometimes the exceptions cast an interesting light on sort of what is the real principle here. What is the real thing that's going on? So there's this huge exception with the IOF, which is that for 26 years, oh boy, Aaron Ataka, a Mohawk from Canada, led this overwhelmingly white organization. And it's really funny. They had the chiefs of the Six Nations had him read an address in honor of Edward, the Prince of Wales, who was touring Canada. His presentation was so polished that the prince arranged for him to study medicine at Oxford University. He went on to, become a respectable person, got in charge of this thing. It's the International Order of Foresters, right? IOF. The membership rose dramatically during his many years in office, from 369 to about 248,000. And then it says part of what he had going for him was a sense of humor. There were opponents of his admission to membership, and they quoted the IOF rule excluding Indians. And he said, the law was intended to exclude from the order only the races which were regarded as being inferior to the whites, and therefore that does not apply to the Mohawks. So I thought that was pretty funny. And anyway, they ended up being very happy with him as their leader. It says they weren't embarrassed. They kind of reveled in it, and they'd actually, in their publications, they'd show him in his native garb and sort of play it up. I guess it was sort of fun. But he says that the IOF was a little more loose than most of the societies. Most societies were, frankly, quite strong in their racial exclusions. It's one historian concluding that fraternalism and racism were two sides of the same coin, asserts that the egalitarianism of American fraternal orders was, quote, made possible by the exclusion of women, blacks, and ethnic minorities from the relevant social universe, a universe whose boundaries fraternal institutions help to demarcate and guard. Okay, listen, keep that phrase in your head. I'm going to come back to it. He says that their exclusion, their egalitarianism within the order was made possible by the exclusion of a whole list of other people, right? And then the author is clearly uncomfortable with all this, and so
Do you know which source that's from? I think I know which author that might be.
I'm sorry, you're talking about what I just read. That
Yeah.
quote. Let's just jump to it real quick. Marianne Clausen, Constructing Brotherhood, Class, Gender, and Fraternalism. It's a Princeton book. Not the sort of book you would read, Clausen.
No.
So the argument that, so he kind of tries to defend them, and he says the argument that racism was endemic to fraternalism is at odds with the readiness of so many Black societies to adopt the name, ritual, and themes of white societies, such as the Oddfellows, the Knights of Pythias, and the Elks. In other words, there were white orders, and there were Black orders, and there were Jewish orders, as we'll see soon, and so on and so forth. So, having horrified some listeners with all this exclusion and racism and so forth, I'm going to explain why I think that there's some sense to this. And that is that it kind of goes back to that knowledge problem, right? That is, when you are dealing with something like mutual aid, where you are going to kind of rely on the people, there's investigations and there's personal testimonials and there's checking up on people. We'll see all of that in this chapter. But in the end, it's not going to work if everybody's trying to cheat it, right? The enforcement mechanisms and the vetting mechanisms are meant to sort of deal with the edges. What it comes down to is the people in the society have got to mostly be wanting to cooperate together, to support each other, to be honest about when they really have troubles that are self-inflicted versus acts of God, so to speak. And it's just going to fall apart if everybody's just trying to scam, right? A society that is just made of people that are all trying to take and not give is not going to work, right? So how do you do something like that? How do you put together a set of people that are going to function in that way? It's harder than you think. And one of the ways you do it is you have the people be kind of homogenous in some respect, religiously, racially, culturally, regional, and what is the reason for that? Because people who are of a similar culture and race and all these various things, religion, are able to kind of understand each other and be talking the same language, right? And it's easier to consider each other as part of the same thing, or because basically, and tell me if I'm wrong here, Clossington, but it seems to me that part of what this is, a way of thinking about this, is that you're sort of artificially constructing something like an extended family. That's what all these groups are really doing. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. The actual arguments I've heard, or the actual arguments I've read, I have a source right here. Albert Mackey justifies. Mackey was one of the co-founders of the modern day Scottish Rite. He justifies exclusion of African Americans along the Aristotelian principle that even if they were freed, they are still slaves to their own passions. Where he lays out that he doesn't believe that the vast majority of them would actually be able to function as free men among equals. And if you're elevating people into a very exclusive secret society where you have to rely on other people rationally, can you really trust a loose end that might be a slave to their own passions, or a slave to, or liable to betray you in any sort of circumstance? You need a very homogenous, high trust society. You can't trust outsiders, or they might betray your brotherhood.
Mm-hmm. Right. So yeah, high trust. That's a great phrase to get in here, because that's in my rambling way. That's what I was trying to say. How do you create high trust?
I have seen cases.
Let me finish my thought. How do you create high trust? And part of the problem with what our friend Academic Agent calls the boomer truth regime is that they are completely deluded about high trust. They think it's very easy to create high trust, and in fact, it's quite hard, and it's easily destroyed. And I think we're seeing that all around us. So these societies have all these crazy things. We went over in other chapters about why they would have secret handshakes and what the point of all that was. And so there's all this stuff, but what it comes down to is you're trying to create a high trust society. But, some of these things may bother you, the exclusivity and so forth. But these little high trust lodges and communities and families and so on and so forth are highly productive, and ultimately end up being able to not just help those within the high trust society, but they generate enough goodwill and so forth that they're often reach out and help others. So it's a foundation, it's a base from which you can help others to create your little high trust crew of whatever sort. Go ahead, Clossington.
I have seen a few examples, particularly in the South, where they where fraternal organizations do extend membership to the, aren't they called like the civilized tribes that ended up being settled in Oklahoma?
They were the Indian tribes that typically had a language of some sort and had adopted European customs on the eastern coast that were put in Oklahoma, yes. They're typically seen as not quite equals, but not quite slave stock either.
Yeah. One Albert Mackey's protege, Albert Pike, ended up, well, Pike himself is very controversial for a whole myriad of reasons, but in terms of his racism credentials, he's unmatched. Brigadier General of the Confederacy, Nativist Party activist. I think he was some high-ranking Klansman, but he did set up a bunch of Masonic lodges among the civilized Indians of Oklahoma, and he did actually argue for their civil rights against the federal government, arguing that they were as civilized as any other Southerner, and they were actually reasonable enough to be accepted in lodges. So the exception does prove the rule. There were a few exceptions.
Right. Okay. I want to try to cover some of the book here. I'm realizing I want to cover this chapter, and it might be too ambitious, but let's see what we can do. Okay. So societies relied on several methods to enforce selectivity. We've already talked about some of them. An investigative committee, which sought to verify worthiness. The black ball. Now we're there, Clossington. So the black ball is a phrase that everyone's heard of, being blackballed. But I never knew until reading this today, last night, Clossington. I did not know what this went back to. So what does this come from? The usual procedure, there you go. The usual procedure was for members to drop balls into a box when they voted on each application. A white ball showed support. A black ball, rejection. A few societies, such as the Masons, required total unanimity. Most provided that 2 or 3 black balls would veto an application. And this is very striking to those of us who don't like democracy. The black ball epitomized the quest of societies to avoid the vagaries of majoritarianism in favor of a more restrictive standard of unanimity or a supermajority. Now, 2 or 3 black balls being enough to veto an application, that's even stronger than a supermajority, I think. You'd expect that means if you get in, that is, you don't get 2 or 3 black balls, you're getting like 98% of the votes or something, right? Almost everybody. It's near unanimous, right? Go ahead.
Most lodges have like around 50 or so active members, and you only really need, if you get one single person to say, "I don't want you to join us," that's enough to cause scandal. But if you get 2,
it's over.
It's over, and you can't resubmit to a different lodge. You're permanently banned from the entire organization.
Okay, more exclusionary tips and tricks. Most societies required claimants for sick benefits to pass muster with a visiting committee. So, in other words, there's becoming a member in the first place, and they've got various vetting, being personally recommended, the black ball process, all this stuff. You get through that. Now you're a member, you're a good dues paying member. And now you want some benefits from the society. You've gotten sick or whatever, injured on the job. They're not done. Now they're going to visit and make sure that you're not trying to cheat, right? These committees, selected by rotation, did not just offer physical and moral support to the sick. They also stood on guard against false claims. So they'd come and be like, "Hey, let's see how you're doing, bring you a pie or whatever. And let's also make sure you're really sick while we're there," right? I just wanted to make sure to get that. I didn't highlight it, but that word, malingering, seems very important. They could disqualify claimants for malingering. Let's see. Yeah. So all these, organized charities and lodges, he does a bit of comparison between public-private charity and these mutual aid societies. Organized charities, like lodges, invariably distinguish between deserving and undeserving. And this is kind of in the rearview mirror for us culturally, but I do remember the phrase "the undeserving poor" floating through my head at some point in my life. So there is it is still there in our group consciousness a little bit. They're trying to destroy it, I think. Let's see. Yeah, and then I don't know how much time to spend on this, but the author of this book is quite concerned by a charge laid against these societies that the values that they wanted to push for, thrift, decorum, sexual restraint, sobriety, so forth, they were middle class, bourgeois, social Darwinist, individualistic, and Protestant. The horrors, right? And he says that gives the impression, the impression that a wide chasm separated economic classes in their attitudes towards social welfare. Okay, so what his concern is to say is that some historians are like, so this is like a middle class thing that was, exclusionary to lower classes and stuff like that. But now he wants to give some quick examples, and I'll probably skip through this a bit, though there's some interesting details here. He wants to give some examples where the two groups that he talks about here don't fit into, being waspy, basically. I mean, that's what all that amounts to. Middle class wasps, I guess.
Like I have a lot of exceptions to those proposed values. What
do you mean?
Middle class, bourgeois, social Darwinistic, individualistic, and Protestant. Like there are very obvious exceptions to those.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, he's about to give us two. So the point of two of these case studies here is to give two large but highly disparate segments of the working class during the early 20th century, and neither organization seems a likely repository for, quote, middle class values. So there's a point. Let me just give away the punchline here. The expectations that these societies had were pretty much just universal. You can't just say, it was the middle class societies or lodges or whatever that were like this and the others weren't. That's just not what we see. They were all like this. They all had strict expectations of behavior and so forth. Go ahead, Ryan.
If you remember the last episode that we did on this, we specifically talked about how these lodges within them didn't exactly have class distinctions. That was something that I believe Teddy Roosevelt noted, I believe is what the book pulls up. So
right.
You can make the case that they had these views because of Protestantism or influence from a specific class, but it would be very strange and contradicting historical testimony to say because they were Protestant or middle class or whatever, they had these views. It would be a very much a leap of logic.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so case study number one, and do you remember what this stands for, Clussington? It's the Odd Fellow. It's a branch of the Odd Fellows, a woman's affiliate of the all-black GUOOF.
I have no clue what that is.
Shoot, I think we already talked about it on the last chapter, but I do want to. Odd Fellows. It's the black affiliate. No, GUOFF. Grand United Order of Odd Fellows. I think that's it. But it's based in Manchester?
That's the parent organization.
Okay, yeah, but this was a yeah, so because the white organizations were not letting blacks in, the blacks started making their own. And I think that's what the GUOFF was.
Yeah, there are many such cases of this.
Right.
Usually created, like sometimes it's fraud, sometimes it's sometimes it's a get rich quick scheme, but a few of them stick around.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a little complicated because he's introducing the GUOOF briefly here, but really he's talking about the women's affiliate called the Household of Ruth. But the men's version of it, black men's version of it, had 304,000 members in 1916. by the way, I just want to keep hammering this every time we talk about this book. This isn't that long ago that these societies were quite ubiquitous. And as Clossington has mentioned, they're not entirely gone even. They're just not as ubiquitous as they once were. But 1916, 1920, we'll see at certain points, this is about 100 years ago. So this isn't like, to return to this sort of mutual aid structure. It's not like going back to the Roman Empire or something, I mean, literally our great-grandparents were in these things, or great-great-grandparents or whatever. So anyway, the GUOFF, 304,000 members in 1916, by far the largest voluntary association of blacks in the United States at that time. And then they had a woman's affiliate called Household of Ruth. And wives of the black Oddfellows, as well as their female relatives, were eligible. The Household of Ruth, let's see, let me make sure I'm saying this right. Yeah. So by 1916, it had an impressive membership of 197,000 in nearly 5,000 lodges around the country. It easily ranked as the single largest black female voluntary organization in the United States. So he's not picking fringe cases here. And then I'm kind of skipping over this, but he sort of places it relative to Prince Hall Masonry, which was another venerable black fraternal organization. I think mostly to show that this was lower income. A lot of lower income folks were in this. And then he focuses in on one lodge in particular, the Sojourner Lodge. And what were their values that they required? The Constitution laid out precautions against malingering that easily rivaled and often exceeded those of the elite-controlled charity societies. The lodge could deny support to members who feigned sickness or disability or suffered from an illness caused by immoral practice. Again, venereal disease and things like this, right? They show little reluctance to revoke funds to the few deemed undeserving. And then he has some actual documentation from their minute book of turning down at least 4 applicants. And then he goes through the reasons they turned them down and so forth. And then he says, but for the ones for every case that they turned down, they also bent over backwards to advance charity to someone who had exhausted benefits or lapsed in dues. And this is a pattern we'll keep seeing, right? Yes, they'd be very exclusionary, very picky, kick you out if you misbehaved or if you tried to cheat the system or whatever. But that put them in a position to be generous to the folks who they felt were worthy, right? And kind of stretch the rules and help people who, technically they should have been paying dues, but they were on hard times. We all knew it. We all knew their situation. Let's just help them anyway, right? You see a lot of this. Let's see. Yeah, so this is bizarre, the kind of critiques he's dealing with here. I just thought I'd share one. So William Moriskin excoriates these restrictive policies. The Prince Hall Masons said you could not be a profane swearer, a reputed libertine, an excessive drinker, one who is guilty of any crime involving moral turpitude, etc., right? This guy, William Moriskin, excoriates these restrictive policies as a misguided strategy by a black middle-class minority to conform to bourgeois values. He concludes that these distinctions have proved detrimental to black unity and have served to exclude and thus cast a stigma on the majority of blacks not subscribing to the dominant white value system. Anyway, the people we have to deal with, good Lord. You get a group of people who try to support each other, try to hold each other to high standards, and you get somebody like this coming along. You just want to slap them,
See, but if we were to say that, restricting profane swearing, libertinism, excessive drinking, and all this other stuff is white values, we would get kicked out of places. Why?
Right.
Yeah.
yeah. It's insane.
It's
anyway,
just the minimum barrier to entry for any sort of decorum.
Yeah. Right. So he says these bourgeois values were not the exclusive domain of the more elite Prince Hall Masons and the GUOOF. They appeared across a wide spectrum of black fraternal societies, regardless of economic class. He lists a bunch of them. all enthusiastically embrace the full gamut of middle class values. And then here's a poem I'll share real quick. It from the Knights and Daughters of Tabor. They used a poem to summarize the moral values and selectivity of the organization. This was written in 1913, and it refers to the mythical goat ridden by all initiates. The fraternal part of this order should be practiced by every hand. It protects the young members from the evils of our land. Instead of roving around at night and gambling just for sport, they go to the camp forest and see the new members ride the goat. This goat is very useful. He is wise as well as good. He knows just what a man can do when he comes to this order of 12. He knows the good men from the bad. He scrambles o'er the floor. If he comes in that isn't fit, he throws him out the door.
There are a few in jokes in there that that the profane will understand.
Okay. Let's see. Oh yeah, and this was interesting. Good moral character, defining feature of worthiness. Yeah, so this is coming from Loyal Lord of the Moose, I think. No, an official of the Black Knights of Pythias on blackballs. He said, he warned that a blackball is not made to be cast against an applicant who wears better clothes than I do, who lives in a better house than I do, who has more brains than I have. It was made to keep out members who are undesirable because of their moral fitness to associate with good people. Neither silks nor rags indicate character. So I thought that was very telling for two reasons. One is that it shows you what they're really trying to focus on, right? They're trying to focus on the moral character of people. It's not just simply about, the Marxists want to make it all about class, right? And that's not really exactly the point. Even if these lodges maybe did tend to be, lower income would be in one and middle income would be another and upper income would be another. That wasn't really what their exclusionary things were about. It wasn't like we just want everybody to be the exact same economic class as us. We want to be able to trust them. That was the point. And the other thing that jumps out to me when he says you don't use the blackball against somebody who's better than you in some regard, even more brains or whatever. This is addressing one of the most toxic things for an organization, and that is envy, right? You do not want to, you can't be a group of fellows if you are spending your time tearing each other down because of envy. That is absolutely going to destroy your organization.
There is some, like, the point of a lot of these fraternities is for interclass, I guess, brotherly love. Just being able to appreciate your neighbor, irrespective of how nice his suit is. However, there are more subtle ways of sort of segregating people by zip code and by how expensive dues are. Like some lodges have $300 per year dues, while others have $50 per year dues. So there is a little bit of how expensive company you want to entertain. But at the same time, Theodore Roosevelt, the master of his lodge, that in the letter that Brian was talking about, the master of his lodge was his gardener, who he wouldn't have otherwise have actually talked to in a sort of
social setting.
Right.
Yeah. So it's quite interesting, and again, I think just a simple-minded Marxist class analysis is going to be very frustrated with all this. Like, it doesn't make sense, right, from that point of view. So let's see here. One of the distinctions he makes is that the kind of help you got from a fraternal order was thought of differently by the people in it and by society in general from charity and welfare. And so he's going to tease out some of sort of the distinctions here. And they're very important distinctions because now I think a lot of the social stigma around taking welfare is probably gone. But at this time, there's a lot of social stigma around taking charity, taking welfare. And so it's very important to establish that getting help from your fraternal order was not the same thing as welfare or charity. Okay. Let's see. Okay, well, this is confusing. He's talking about black reformers. He's basically talking about bad guys here who well, okay, wait, give me a sec. I'm forgetting the context of this quote. Okay, among black reformers, despite their relatively elite position, welfare appeared more closely connected with legal entitlements, not so different from the right to vote or to ride the public transportation system. Right, so the leading black activists had this entitlement perspective. And here he says there is sort of a divergence between the elite and the lower class black female. So the elite, who had all the fashionable views or whatever, would take this entitlement view. But the women in the household of Ruth apparently did not share the entitlement perspective embraced by the leading black activists. So there's a break here between how things are viewed. And one way of looking at this is that with the progressives, the 100-year ago progressives pushing, rule by experts and really the beginnings of what we now know as the welfare state and everything, is that these sort of this entitlement perspective ended up sort of crushing everything else. Okay, now here's the second case study. The first one was about these lower class or black women, lower income black women, lower class black females. Now there's the WC, the Arbeiter Ring, which is a Jewish fraternal society, and originated in 1891. This one had close links with the Socialist Party. This might be really depressing, this next section, for right-wingers, because, how far have we fallen? This Jewish socialist fraternal order is much more functional and selective and exclusionary in the good sense that this chapter is explaining, than anything we're allowed legally to do anymore. Just about, So the WC counted Emma Goldman and Alexander Berkman as members. So that's interesting. Membership expanded from about 8,000 in 1908 to 70,000 by the early 1930s, almost half in New York City, right? And he says, they were self-consciously working class, socialist, egalitarian, all the things you'd expect of Socialist Party aligned people. But he says when push came to shove, the WC was selective, just like all these other fraternal orders. Strict restrictions against cheating, with flexibility toward members who seemed worthy. For example, during the Depression, the National Office established a relief department to care for destitute members and advanced $100,000, that's some serious money back then, by the way, to assist members who were unemployed or had fallen into arrears. That is, by the rules of the WC, they didn't necessarily have to be supported, but they supported them anyway. The pattern we see, right? They had strict guidelines for personal, moral, and political behavior. And they had throughout the 20s, they had a substantial yearly expulsion rate of between 7 and 15% of the total national membership. And one of the punishable offenses, and I want everybody to be very mature about this right now in the chat and everything. One of the punishable offenses of this Jewish group was charging usurious interest rates. So,
Oy vey.
The International Workers' Order, similar outfit in terms of being left-wing. A fraternal society aligned closely with the Communist Party, denied benefits for disabilities caused by venereal disease, alcohol, narcotics. Among Jews, many regional associations and family circles expelled members who married Gentiles. Right, so there's that exclusionary stuff again. Okay, now that's the Jewish thing. I didn't want to go too deep into it, but you get an idea of that the WC. So now he's going to talk about sort of how mutual aid compares and contrasts with charity and welfare aid. So charity and welfare aid restrictions revolved around adversarial donor and recipient relationships because they were hierarchical. That could cause problems. Those of fraternal societies, on the other hand, more closely approximated principles of reciprocity. Adversarial relationships between donor and receiver seemed endemic to any personal poor relief system, public or private, entitlement-based or means-tested, controlled and funded by distant bureaucrats or other outsiders. Donor and recipient in the fraternal society were peers in the same organization, on the other hand. They often knew each other well on a personal level. So this is really striking to me. I'm seeing a lot, learning a lot about managerialism. A friend on Twitter, Kryptos, is writing on Substack about Jacques Ellul, and the idea of seeing, it's not just the government, it's, all these companies that are totally aligned with government, all the journalists, everything we've been learning about in recent years, right? What they have in common is that they all are kind of systematizers, they're managerialist, they move things towards the impersonal. What is the answer to that sort of thing? Well, I think this is giving us some big clues, right? It is personal engagement, personal relationships, personal endorsements of people, reestablishing trust back to these are the people I actually know and whose track record I can vouch for, right? We're back to that if we're going to escape the bureaucratic matrix.
So there's something, and this is finally the channel where I can talk on YouTube about economics. I don't have to just hold it back because it's not related to the subject. But we could reason out this sort of adversarial versus reciprocity relationship using our economic knowledge, just because the fraternal organizations are voluntary actions taken by people because that's what they desire to do. Stephen, you and I would know that as because they took the action, it was the highest thing on their value scale. They valued doing this more than doing anything else with any other resource at that point in time. Whereas forced redistribution, leaving out private charity for a second here, but forced redistribution like state welfare is going to be coercive in that you forcefully take some sort of material from one group of people and give it to a different group, probably at a negative sum. You're probably not going to keep the wealth exactly the same by doing that. You're definitely not generating wealth. You are most likely destroying wealth. You're going to have to pay the bureaucrats and all this other stuff who are not supposed to be factored into the equation of welfare. They are just workers. So using our economic knowledge, Stephen, we could actually get to this point in the book, and it actually paints a much more grim picture for forced redistribution and paints a much lighter picture for this fraternal society. So, getting some sort of help from people because that is what they want to do. Like they voluntarily and spontaneously, from your point of view, act that way, as opposed to it had to be forcefully given and the wealth destroyed in the process. There's something much more meaningful about that on a sort of on a communal level or on a more organic level. There's something more noble here about the fraternal assistance than about forced redistribution.
Yes. So when what we seem to see, especially once the Great Society comes into place, right, and the book will get into this later, is that going from personal to impersonal not only has sort of inefficiency costs that Ryan mentioned, right? It has it's destructive relationally, right? It's when you help someone that you know in their time of need, when you allow others to help you in your time of need, that builds relationship, right? One of the strongest things you can do is, do favors for each other, right? This is the kind of thing that builds lasting bonds between people. Whereas, some money disappears from my paycheck and someone else walks up to I don't know how it works, gets direct deposited welfare into their bank account or whatever. No relationship building is happening. And in fact, we find the Great Society is just really destructive to marriages, families, communities, neighborhoods, right? It's bad stuff. Okay, let's see. What else do I want to highlight here? Let's see. Yeah, fraternal concept of reciprocity entailed mutual obligations between members and the organization to which they belonged. Is wholly antagonistic to the idea that the donor should dole out one-way entitlements. So, editor, the Fraternal Monitor, I wonder what that is. Anyway, this editor of the Fraternal Monitor asserted that fraternity, like religion or a savings bank, gives most to those who put in most. And the best deposit in the bank of fraternity is heartfelt interest and support. By the way, this thing of, he says, like religion, it gives most to those who put in most. I addressed this a little bit in my speech in the UK last year on the vanguard of Christendom, where I talk about how early Christianity worked in that way. Let's see. So what else here? Let's see. So Vina West, making this distinction, she characterized fraternity as absolutely distinct from charity or philanthropy. It is liberalizing, self-sustaining, elevating, gives mutual rights, and preserves independence of character. Philanthropy, on the other hand, signifies condescension, a position of superiority on the part of the organization and of dependency on the part of the recipient. I don't have numbers to throw at you, but I remember in all this reading I've done for decades, running across something that mentioned that most of the charity that people receive, if you want to call it that, most of the aid that people receive is not from like billionaires or whatever. It's usually from people who know them and are in very similar economic circumstances as themselves. So lower income people primarily receive help from other lower income people, not from Bill Gates or something. Clessington?
I wouldn't necessarily say that fraternities don't do charity or philanthropy. I mean, that's one of their most well-known sort of bread and butter. Like there were a ton of Masonic orphanages. Like to this day, there are a bunch of elder care, old folks' homes that are bolstered by state grand lodges. There are like most lodges have their own sort of pet charities that they subsidize. $1,000 here, $100 there. I wouldn't say that there's necessarily they do both charity / philanthropy as well as mutual aid directly.
Right. No, so I understand that fraternal orders, once they use the power of exclusion to create a high trust group, right? They help each other, and then they're able to do more than that, right? There's a Bible verse that is coming to mind. I'll see if I can pull it up. But anyway, and she's just distinguishing between, when she says she characterized fraternity as absolutely distinct from charity or philanthropy. I don't think her point is that fraternal organizations never do any charity or philanthropy. She's just saying that these are very different kinds of things, that the mutual aid is a different sort of thing from charity or philanthropy. And she's speaking in praise of that mutual aid as against philanthropy. There's a lot of benefits to the mutual aid approach, right? Here, let me finish a little more on his section here where he's making these distinctions. Fraternal benefits, if viewed from this angle, more closely resembled conditional entitlements than charity. As long as members kept their end of the contractual relationship, they could justly demand aid as their due. As an official of the Jewish community said, mutual aid organizations were formed for the purpose of rendering aid to members, not as gratuitous charity, but as obligatory settlement of claims based on a mutual agreement as formulated in the constitution of the respective organizations or in the membership certificate. So the point is, don't think of it as like a complicated way to do charity. It's more like you're entering into an agreement with a bunch of other people. You know, when I fall in hard times, you help me, and when you fall in hard times, I help you. Is it fair enough, Glossington? Is that making sense?
Yeah, fair enough.
Right. So we've been talking about high trust and stuff. Another way of putting that is solidarity. The aid restrictions of fraternal societies rested on an ethic of solidarity. By limiting benefits to those deemed deserving of the solidarity, they were not unlike labor unions, he says. Let's see. The Fraternal Order of Eagles stated a simple rule: charity to the outside world, but to a brother, anything we can give is his due. And then that struck me, and I think we'll see a little more of this, because it's that focus of stronger in-group support. Yes, help others, but your first call is to support sort of those closest to you, right? In your own lodge, in your own family, so forth. Let's see.
A more personal example of this would be recently there was the train derailment out in East Palestine. It was about 45 minutes away from my lodge, so naturally, we sent them like $1,000 to help cover their hotel expenses, and we sent them like a little food package of all the goods that we could get together.
Mm-hmm.
Even though they were, I'm Pennsylvania and they're Ohio, it's still just a local response to a local problem.
Right. Let's see, where was I? Okay, yeah, and then he just talks about, again, with this thing of preference to the people closest to you. Second degree initiates of the IOSL pledge to extend aid to the distressed wherever I find them, but particularly to a brother or sister. They also vowed to provide members with employment opportunities for business patronage in preference to all other males or females. So there's exclusion, there's preference, but the resulting solidarity from all this is, in my view, highly beneficial. Okay, now this next section is quite interesting because he quotes from Max Weber, who evidently came and learned about fraternal societies in the United States. I didn't know this.
Yeah, I mean, is this shocking?
I just didn't know. It's not shocking. I mean, it's awesome. Weber was a serious thinker. I've read some of him, and he's one to learn from. Right. So not only would you get like these insurance benefits or whatever, aid when you needed it or whatever, but you gained access to a larger social and financial network. In his comments on fraternal societies in the United States during a visit in 1904, Max Weber described lodge affiliation as a mark of creditworthiness. So just the fact that you were in a lodge, that is, you had passed the vetting and all that, right? And so he writes, he noted that membership was acquired through balloting and a determination of moral worth, and hence the badge in the buttonhole meant, I am a gentleman, patented after investigation and probation and guaranteed by my membership. One could observe that business opportunities were often decisively influenced by such legitimation. And I think he gives some examples. Yeah, it says that C.L. Dellums, president of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters and a Prince Hall Mason, described how his fraternal affiliation even transcended ethnic differences on occasion. He obtained his first job on the railroad because a white Mason had noticed his Masonic pen. So that's quite interesting, right? One of these sort of exceptions, you might say, They wouldn't allow the black guy to join their Masonic lodge, but he saw the black guy was a Mason and recommended him for the job or hired him or whatever, because it did carry weight that he had gone through this process, that he was a member of the Masons, right?
I guess there are a few different elements to this. Like, yes, it does actually say, I went through the process where I was vetted and 50 other guys see that I am of upright character.
Mm-hmm.
And that in and of itself is something noteworthy and says, like, I am a social individual and people will back me up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But there's also something that I don't think you really intended, but a lot of like, especially later on, like later in the 1930s through 1960s, there's a lot of I guess you call it like sticker collecting, where wealthy individuals would join as many fraternal orders as they possibly could afford. So like, yeah, you might be a Mason, but do you belong to these 4 other extracurricular organizations and pay like an extra couple $100 a year and go to
Right.
all of those social parties?
Mm-hmm.
It says, I'm rather wealthy, well off, and I go to a lot of parties.
Right. Well, and I mean, would there be a networking aspect to it? Maybe
Yes, there is a lot of networking.
Yeah. So more groups that let me in, the more networks I'm connected into, right?
Right. So you'll notice like presidents, starting with Warren G. Harding and then FDR and Truman, like those 3 presidents were members of all of the clubs.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, which is interesting, Clossington, because as you know, some of us are a bit suspicious of Freemasonry. But it kind of gives, I wonder if there's a little bit of anachronism here, right? Which is like, this guy who was politically savvy or whatever saw a point in joining like a bunch of different organizations because it helped him be connected and stuff. Does that mean that we should define him as a Mason president, right? Maybe, but maybe not.
I think that typically a lot of the suspicion that comes from especially Protestants, some Protestants and Roman Catholics around these lodges, are the fact that they require people to swear certain oaths and beliefs that aren't necessarily Christian, at least according to those groups, which then means that if you are in those churches, it then stands to reason that they will then not act like a Christian, so they do see a causal relationship there that only exists if you do believe what they believe. So it might be good to factor that into the equation.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to do a little bit more in the book here. Okay, yeah. So
to add to the,
ahead.
I guess to add to the point of like, yes, there is networking, but that also comes with the opposite side of that coin, which is nepotism, where you end up with a lot of, especially municipal governments, where it kind of becomes a nepotistic hotbed where all the members of the local government belong to the same lodge.
Right.
Like the lodge that I was initiated in, both the mayor and the police chief were like, they belonged to the same lodge as I did. So you end up with, but at the same time, like, what type of person joins a lodge? It's usually a well-to-do, middle-class, sociable individual who's interested in their community and knowing their neighbors. So it's the same temperament, like the same type of person who temperamentally goes into local government also joins lodges where nepotism can happen.
Okay, a couple more things here. Let's see. Yeah, societies gave non-monetary help to members on a more systematic level. A number of organizations functioned as labor exchanges to bring together workers and business people who were members. And this is a striking example. For several decades, the Irish owners of the Anaconda Copper Company entrusted authority for hiring in Butte, Montana to job committees of the Ancient Order of Hibernians. So they literally outsourced their hiring to a fraternal order. So that's interesting.
I know a lot of industrialists, especially in the East Coast and Midwest, encourage their factory workers to join fraternities, just to have a sort of solidarity between management and their workers.
Mm-hmm. Right, to address the union sort of worker versus management framing, right?
It's like, hey, we're all friends here. Like if you're coming across hard times, your manager will back you up.
Right. Yeah, we've already talked about this, but almost all societies recognize the need to help the worthy member who had fallen victim to extraordinary and unanticipated setbacks. And fraternal assistance was most in demand, of course, during hard times. So during the early 20s, Loyal Order of the Moose adopted a program to aid unemployed members after 32,000 of them had fallen into arrears during a recession. Some of us know very well about the recession of 1921, which is not usually talked about. This is the key point. It recommended carrying 22,000 of those members on the rolls if fair extension of time could be arranged. So they were stretching the rules, right, to help people out. Examples such as this moved insurance historian Terence O'Donnell to comment that the esprit de corps of a fraternal beneficiary society is one of its most valuable assets, and it's far out of proportion to the goodwill a purely commercial company can claim. So there were benefits here over and above a for-profit company in some ways. And I already said this, but many lodges were willing to bend or even break national rules when. This is back to the localism. Many lodges were willing to bend or even break national rules when they conflicted with the perceived needs of local members. So, for example, the MWA said you couldn't list mining. Mining was an excluded occupation because they were excluding people who were in too hazardous of a line of work. But in the Cripple Creek area, they aggressively recruited miners despite the national rule. Because I guess it was a mining community, right? So they'd make exception according to local circumstances. Let's see. Here's some of this helping people during natural and man-made disasters. During 1927, the National Office of the Improved Benevolent and Protective Order of the Elks, a Black organization, donated more than $4,000 to members who had been victims of Mississippi floods and Florida hurricanes. A wide range of societies responded to the San Francisco earthquake of 1906. The wives, I think, of the LOTM contributed $6,000 in cash and dozens of boxes of clothes. The much larger IOF also launched a campaign for the earthquake victims. By July, lodges in the United States and Canada had raised $15,000 in special aid for San Francisco. So this is a way that things would be dealt with without the state. Imagine that. But yeah, so fraternalists, this is one of the themes I wanted to get out of this chapter. Fraternalists generally gave priority to the needs of the immediate circle of the local lodge. Local lodges came first. And he gives some examples of that, where, there'd be he talks about it, there's a flood, and a lodge kind of sends a very small contribution. It's like, we got a lot of poor members we're helping right now, so we can't help much with something more distant from us. And I'm sure they were not rebuked. You take care of your own first. You take care of your local needs first. If you are able, help others. Scholars have made much of the fraternal dedication to exclusivity and selectivity. As Marianne Clausen points out, listen to this wonderful quote, fraternalism bases itself on a principle of exclusion from which it derives much of its power. Most societies held to a philosophy that members had a right to assistance. This stand was in direct contrast to the official policies of organized charities and governments. At the same time, of course, as we've seen, society's never provided unconditional aid. You had to be worthy. Okay, so I think I was able to pull out all the big themes in this chapter that I was excited. And now I want to let Clossington and Ryan, if he has comments, freestyle on it. What are some of the themes here? The local, you take care of your local first, and then if you can, you help others that are less local, right? But take care of home first. And Ryan, can you remember the verse I'm thinking of? It's that those who are able, you're like a worse than a pagan if you don't help your family.
Yeah. Those who do not care for their family are worse than an unbeliever. Hold on, I think it's in.
But then he goes on to say something. Maybe it's not
hold.
that same passage. He says, like, if you are able to, after taking care of your own family, if you have more enough, then also help others, right? So there's a clear preference here.
Right. 1 Timothy 5:8. Go look at there, because it's going to take me just a second to pull that up. But if I could actually speak to some of the, just a general trend that we've been talking about, since this is much more in the specifics category of how these fraternities actually operated. Something that you just generally see is that societies become more and more complex the more exclusion that there is from elements within that society. So one of the most complex societies that humanity has ever witnessed was probably in the medieval era, probably somewhere around the Holy Roman Empire. So just due to the massive amounts of orders, layers, social classes, societies, nobility positions, landowning positions, and all this other stuff that people could inhabit or have, this sort of complexity only exists because you can exclude people, and it develops very naturally. This is how humans tend to develop. If you leave humans alone without any sort of intervention, they will develop communities that become, over time, more and more exclusive. This is why governments in the modern era, in order to counteract this, have to constantly be watching for forms of discrimination that can creep into places. But that exclusivity and this continual complexity of society is a very good thing. It allows people to be much wealthier, it allows people to be better off. But it also allows just normal societies to exist with more defenses around them. If you have one society that has been equalized across the board, as opposed to a naturally developed society that continually becomes more complex, the equalized society will not be able to withstand as much as the complex society. There's not as much redundancy. The people are forced to become much more homogenous than they otherwise were. So you get less specialization. Things will start to fall apart more easy if it even gets as complex as it's able to where it requires specialization. So what we see here in the fraternal organizations that we've been reading really helps illustrate this great general trend of what humans naturally do, and then what unnatural forces like state discrimination policy helps to destroy, which is just the natural development of our civilizations. That's what I wanted to touch on.
Yeah, so what were the themes? The local comes first, the scripture that Ryan found, 1 Timothy 5:8, anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. And in my view, Ryan, this is a verse that I don't think you have to stretch too far to deploy it against sort of the pro-mass immigration people, to say, hey, you're supposed to take care of your own first. And then, once they're okay, then you can sort of look to others, right? But to sort of destroy your family for the benefit of humanity or something, or destroy your community or your nation, that's got it all upside down, right? In fact, if I can pull it up, that Aram tweet just nailed it, said it so perfectly. But anyway, and then the other theme here is exclusion, that the exclusion was not random. It served a purpose. It allowed people to build trust and support each other. And it feels, they've made exclusion, discrimination, whatever you want to call it, they've made this like the ultimate evil for some reason. It's part of what Academic Agent calls the boomer truth regime, I guess. But as we look back to this mutual aid, where they're functioning in a very different, more human, more human scale way, more relational way, more bonded way, then we see them using various principles of exclusion to try to create societies that can, smaller groups of people who can really cooperate and really help each other. So as hard as it is for some people to swallow these days, exclusion can be good. To take care of my family first and exclude people who would harm my family from my land, from my home, that's good. That's a good thing, right? That allows me to raise a family of people who are not crazy, who can go on and be solid and stable and help others, right? So Clossington, any thoughts you want to share along the lines of these various themes that this chapter has raised?
Well, I guess on the theme of exclusion, you have to be, in order to trust that your neighbors will actually help you out when you're down, you have to make certain, you need to make sure that they are upright moral characters themselves. And that requires a large amount, I wouldn't say a large amount, but it takes a little bit of weeding out to weed out individuals who are, what were the phrases? It was like libertine, like
right.
atheists aren't allowed,
drunk,
like intemperate. You can't rely on that type of person to help you out when you are down, and you can't rely on strangers for charity either, which is why there's a lot of de jure and de facto segregation in these societies. So I guess the point of this chapter is that a certain amount of moral uprightness and homogeneity is required for there to be reciprocal brotherhood.
Right. But that's how they did it. And I would say we've had a good run here of many decades where they're trying to show that you can do this on very different principles. And I think it's pretty well recognized that, the welfare state, which the book will get into later, has been just a disaster, as an example. I did find that two tweets by Aaron McIntyre that I think are relevant, and I just loved so much, so I wanted to highlight them. He said, "Those who claim to love humanity, the poor, the refugee, or the immigrant in the abstract almost always do so to avoid caring for anyone in particular. It is in the particularity of our family, our neighbor, our community where we learn to love real and specific people. It's easy to love an abstraction, someone far away who makes no real demands on us, who requires no real connection. It is much harder to see the broken and flawed person standing next to us and pour out our hearts for them." Beautifully, beautifully put. Really captures something important. And I remember Kierkegaard writing something along these lines. I got to find that quote one of these days. He said, "I can't help but notice that those who love humanity tend to be pretty nasty to the actual humans that are near them."
Well, and very similar to this, Kierkegaard writes multiple times that a lot of Christians during his time, he was writing this in the 1840s, he's over 100 years removed. How applicable can Kierkegaard be? He was writing at this point in time that the Christian establishment, the state church in Denmark, was making Christianity a religion of peace and nothing else. And the reason he said that he was doing this because it's in their interests, the people in the state church that directly benefit from each new member that they add, it's in their interest to just increase the size of Christianity like a tumor, basically, just nominally. It has nothing to do whether anyone believes it, whether they've taught anyone, whether anything good has actually happened. They just need to make sure that growth happens, they get more money, more silk, more material.
Right.
So that's what they do.
Interesting.
And Kierkegaard has a article from the Fatherland, which was a newspaper, that was called Salt. That's the one title of it, and he's referencing the passage in the Gospels where Christ told his followers to be salt. If the salt loses its saltiness, it's not worth anything as salt. It gets thrown out. Kierkegaard makes the great point that they can't teach the actual gospel because it requires people to be salt. It requires people to do things that are uncomfortable, and doing things that are uncomfortable and take effort that make you unpopular, like being a Christian, is not something that naturally lends itself to just increasing ever more followers. So they have to make everything very egalitarian, very watered down. They have to make everything sound nice in order to keep their positions. A lot of Christians in the modern day have the same thing. Even though we don't have a state church or an establishment, we do still have the same exact elite that have this incentive system of growth for the sake of growth for their own material comfort. So, anyone that wants to read more along that line of loving things in the abstract and hating individual people, that article in the Fatherland Salt, it's included in a collection of essays called Attack Upon Christendom, would be a great one. Kind of plays into what we're talking about here with fraternities, because it's the exact opposite. They care about individual people and they are not concerned with the abstract necessarily. So,
yeah, well, and that's interesting because basically he's saying that the church, for reasons that didn't have to do with serving Christ, was becoming inclusive, right?
That's exactly what he is saying. Yes, there is a very strong anti-egalitarian strand in Kierkegaard that isn't appreciated because it's kind of hemmed into this one attack upon Christendom work.
Is this essay not online?
Look up Attack Upon Christendom PDF. There should be a free version from a site called Holy Books, and within that book, there's articles from the Fatherland, and then Salt is one of those. But I don't know if it's entirely relevant to what we're doing here, only tangentially. So that's kind of why I brought it up at the end here.
Yeah. So Clausington, since we have you here, and you've this is not just abstract history for you. This is a lived reality. My general sense is that membership of fraternal orders is way, 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 way down from what it was, 100 years ago, 150 years ago, or whatever, as a percentage of the population. But it's clearly not gone altogether. So I'm just concerned that I'm over-exaggerating the death of mutual aid societies. Like, are they still pretty active? Are they still out there? Are there young people in them? Are you the only one under 70? That kind of thing.
I'd say that most are dying a sort of, well, I would say that the boomers did not take up the fraternal orders that the greatest generation partook in, and that started a sort of long decline that has been steady. There are always a few people that will join and like, no, I'm not like the only guy under 70. Like there are actually quite a few Zoomers that do end up getting involved in these sorts of things.
Okay.
It is sort of on a death spiral though, in the long run.
Right. It is overall graying quite a bit. Right?
So the general trajectory looks something like the time period that you are covering is sort of known as the golden age of fraternalism, from roughly the end of the Civil War to about, well, it depends on where you want to stake it, but some will stake it in like the mid 1950s when fraternal membership peaks on paper. However, I believe that the decline starts around the Great Depression, where lodges begin to lower membership dues and stop actually providing direct mutual aid in order to increase membership and make it a little bit more lax, which results in a very high exit, low commitment culture of fraternalism that developed in the 40s and 50s that the boomers didn't actually take up, resulting in a sort of death spiral that we're seeing right now.
Gotcha. Okay, so signs of trouble starting in the Great Depression, but it's really once the hippie generation would be the ones to carry it forward where it really falters? That's your general perception.
Like my general perception is that that labor fraternities were killed towards the end of World War One,
Okay.
and then I'd say around the Great Depression. That's when lodges started dropping, like lowering membership dues, and the sort of free rider problem started taking over. But on paper, membership dramatically increased immediately after World War II.
Mm-hmm.
But it started diving in like after the 50s.
Well, you have to look at this lowering of membership dues within a wider context as well. Why would you? People are being forced to pay into a welfare system by around this point in time that will continue to grow. It's not yet in modern at modern levels, but it's still an establishment by the 30s. So if you keep charging the same amount and offering the exact same things, on top of what people are already forced to contribute into due to state action, it's you have to adapt in some way, which I'm sure this book will actually cover. And then the other thing about the labor fraternities is that it's specifically going to be just after World War One, where they start getting cracked down upon, because that's where you get a lot of your American historians calling it the first Red Scare, happening right after World War One, during, maybe even sometimes before if you get a looser historian. But that's a lot of these places where the labor fraternities in particular weren't exactly conducive to American society functioning normally. A lot of them tended to be more subversive, I guess you could say, was typically the accusation lobbed at them. Clossington, I'm sure, might have more details there, but that's typically the issue with a lot of more traditional parts of America looking at these labor fraternities.
Yeah, I would agree that the first Red Scare broke the back of a lot of the most powerful labor fraternities. And ironically, a lot of the labor fraternities were put down by paramilitary fraternities. Ironically, I have a book called For the Common Good that lists out all of the paramilitary fraternities for each city. Like instead of having a national guard, you and your ethnic neighbors formed a militia that could be called upon to crush the unions whenever you really felt like, but whenever the need arose. But the first Red Scare really did crush. Like Ryan said, the social utility of having volunteer mutual aid societies dissolved with the Great Society and with the implementation of FDR's welfare system. And after that, fraternities essentially became a esoteric social club without a lot of the pragmatic economic ups to keep people like actually reliant on them for aid in the case that they actually needed aid. And after they became sort of social clubs, then the free rider problem really took hold, and then membership started lowering over time.
Right. Yeah. So there's a delicate thing there. Like I said, it's not as easy as it looks. There's a delicate balance they were doing with exclusionary practices and everything to retain the high trust, and then sort of inflationary, right? They lowered standards, grew membership, but lost the magic of what made the whole thing work, right?
Yeah, that's about it.
Okay, I'm ready to do super chats. Anything else, Clossington, you've been dying to get in on the that came to mind as we went through that chapter?
What really came to mind is there's a book called The Craft by John Dickey that went into a little bit how both sides of the civil rights movement, integrationists and segregationists, they both had their respective fraternities backing them. A ton of the old Dixiecrats, like Strom Thurmond and George Wallace, were proper Masons and held public talks at their lodges in support of segregation. While a lot of the NAACP types were what are they called? They were Prince Hall Masons. And even a lot of the OG abolitionists, black abolitionists, were Prince Hallers.
Right.
I don't know. It's weird to think about how, on paper, like a lot of these fraternities say, like we're like the brethren for all mankind, but they end up being in practice self-selecting.
Oh, I've shared a link, though it kind of the formatting got mangled. But anyway, I'll just share the link by itself. That's annoying. Sharing a link to that book by John Dickey.
I also have, I think I can find a clip of the private militias, like private militia fraternities that grew out of American cities.
Oh, yeah, someone in the comments, based fraternal militia for the win, it says. So there's a connection to the militia movement, which was quite strong in the 19th century, as I understand it.
Yeah, I just sent you a DM.
Okay.
It's a list of all of the paramilitary fraternities in the city of San Francisco in 1879.
Okay.
So, like you'd notice that there were like 2 private McCannon batteries at the time.
Oh, I don't know how to share you don't have this on Twitter, do you? Okay, well, I'll share a Telegram link for those who.
I think I actually do. I think I actually did post it on Twitter.
Oh, okay. Sorry, juggling. Here we go. So, yeah, what do I label this? This is militias. Or here, I'll use your text and then just link to it so people can see the image. Yeah, so in 1879, you write. There we go. It's too long for one tweet.
But that particular block of text comes from the book For the Common Good by Kaufman, which had a particularly interesting chapter on competitive militants, on how different ethnic quarters would compete for membership, try and outcompete each other for membership, to see who could have the largest paramilitary group.
And this was 1879, so not that long ago. Yeah, I like were those yours words? These your words? The past is a foreign country.
Yeah, like rather
totally.
pacifistic San Francisco had like 20 ethnic militias, like private militias running around at any one point to crush like local labor unions, which themselves were private militias in their own right.
Okay. I want to go to super chats. Is that all right, Clausington? Am I cutting you off?
That's all right.
Okay, let's do 2 real quick. Wotan005 says we can take a hint. That was right at the beginning, and I'm not sure. Oh, maybe that's when I was shilling the subscribe star.
Yeah,
anyway,
we were talking about how good donations were.
Yeah, how helpful. Prince of Parma, envy is perhaps the greatest internal danger to the E-right. Talking about the my comment about envy being really destructive. Yeah, we should, if we're going to work together, we need to rejoice in each other's successes instead of being like, oh, why is he getting attention and I'm not, or something. That's the sort of thing that causes real problems. I'm just going to jump through the non-paying chat and see if anything jumps out before we go. Oh, Socrates was blackballed. Is that right? So technically Pebbles, he says. I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, it was like blackballing, like in its modern context, is a Masonic thing. However,
Right.
the Athenians voted using black and white pebbles, which is where Masons got it from.
Gotcha. Okay. This is funny. Stephen sounds exactly like Professor Bart Ehrman. Everything, even the laugh and sense of humor. I guess I need to look up who this person is. Bart Ehrman. I don't know. Would it be disturbing to see someone who is like me? Okay. Let's see. Yeah, I think you already kind of said that. Yeah, so someone says, no name says, surely, therefore, if we wanted a voluntary association to function, then we would have to operate one with high barriers to entry. Many of the requirements we've just heard. Yes, sir. And this is not entirely theory. We are doing this. Let's see, anything else? Sorry. Hey, now. Picking on Ryan. Yeah, maybe you could comment. This is a good question. I don't know if you answered in the chat here, but can you give an indication of what is good moral character? Does that mean having a job? Can you have good moral character and not have a job? Yeah. So comments, Clossington, on historically what that would have meant?
It depends on the fraternity. Like if you're joining like a labor fraternity, or one that is like an insurance company fraternity, like they have very specific criteria. But like Odd Fellows or Masons, or like the bench line is you have a stable job, and you're not a felon, and you believe in some higher power, usually Protestant. You go to a Protestant church. Those are the sort of basic benchmarks. Like, as long as you're not a felon or obviously a bad person, as judged by, like, can I actually eat dinner with you and have a good conversation without you becoming a menace to everyone else around you? It's kind of self-explanatory. It's like, what kind of person would you like to have dinner with? That's the sort of good moral character benchmark that most places have.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I think I'm caught up with all the comments I wanted to highlight. Okay, listen to this, Clossington. Requited says, I do recommend Dyer's video. What is his first name? Dyer, I know the name.
Is it Jay Dyer?
Jay Dyer, there we go. I do recommend Jay Dyer's video on Crowley, Aleister Crowley. The British really gave fraternities a bad look at this time, as the esoteric and hermetic ones became public, and many officials were also Masons. That sounds like a huge rabbit hole, but can you give us a short response to that?
Okay, so within Freemasonry, the symbology can be either as simple as it's more or less a medieval construction work site meeting, but it can easily be extrapolated into sort of basic sort of Renaissance alchemy or Hermeticism, and so it kind of becomes like baby's first Hermetic occult order. And I'd say that like 95% of members, treat the lodge like a medieval stonemasons guild, but
Mhm.
like 5% go down like esoteric rabbit holes.
Mm.
And Crowley went down every single rabbit hole possible.
He did them all, yeah.
And that's the sort of consensus that most people come to. Where Crowley got up to all sorts of no good. Like he resurrected the old Illuminati uh, initiation degrees. He did all sorts of weird magic stuff. And a lot of those orders are still around. I actually know a guy who is still in the I forget what that order is called, but it's like I'd have to look it up. But a lot of the old Crowley stuff is bizarre, and people look down on it. But it's always been kind of I don't know how to describe it. Like Crowley is a bizarre case, and I'm not sure. I have never seen this Jadar video in particular, so I don't know how he properly explained it.
Okay, some last things. I did share a Twitter link in case that works better for you, where it shows the list of independent paramilitary militias in 1879 in San Francisco. That's kind of fun. I'm also sending, and help me to be better. I'm also, Brian, I'm also sending a link to a show that starts in 95 minutes.
Yeah.
It is Pony Express Radio, which is a current event show of the Old Glory Club. We've got a special guest tonight, Patrick Casey. I got to meet him last year in the UK, of all places. We're both American, but that's where I met him. And the topics are the lost F-35. And you guys are going to have to help me. What's the UAW topic?
I've had my nose down in books all week, so I guess we're going to have to find out on stream.
Yeah, right. Senate dress codes in Italy. The immigration situation in Italy. So, as indicated by the very nicely done. Oh, yeah. Wow. The thumbnail. Click the link and just appreciate the thumbnail. Our graphic designer had great fun there.
Yeah. So the audience heard Stephen say that we were putting some of these principles into practice that we're reading about. This is it. This is the Old Glory Club. At least this is the media production from it. So go check it out if you haven't looked into it just yet. It's a great and promising organization.
And Ryan is one of the officers, and I was the first president. So and Clossington's involved as well. So anyway, encourage you to join that. And I just am kicking myself, Ryan, because the Pony Express Radio is always after my show, so it should just become a habit of pointing people off to that. So send audience folks right to it. So anyway, put that link into the chat so you can join that. And thanks for Lady of Shalott jumping in and being helpful as usual.
Is it the United Auto Workers strike, perhaps?
Is there a strike by the United Auto Workers?
I believe so.
I didn't know that. Okay, well, then I should listen and find out what's going on. Okay, all right. I think that's everything. Thanks so much to Clossington for jumping in. It's been kind of silly in a way that we hadn't involved him already because he has a lot of knowledge in this area about these mutual aid societies. As we continue through the book, so far it's sort of been documenting what was, which I think is super valuable for us, right? How did these things work? How did they work as organizations? If we're going to produce any of this, we need to learn from the past. But then as the book continues, we'll see the welfare state come in and see how mutual reciprocal aid started to come under attack. So the story will continue to be interesting, but that'll be like 2 weeks from now if Ryan's available. Otherwise, next week it should be Black Horse and I with Econ Minis talking about current economic affairs and things like that. And we've got a lot of stuff lined up because we haven't had a show in over a month. So we won't have had a show for over a month by then. So, all right. Thanks to Ryan and Clausington, and thanks to everybody. And see you next week. Bye.